Well, thank you so much for this kind invitation, and it's wonderful to see all the people in the audience that I know and to meet the people that I don't. So, um, just a bit of background on my approach to AI. My initial contact with the subject was over half a century ago in 1970 when I was a graduate student and I read the first scholarly paper on AI in education, in which the author confidently asserted that we wouldn't need teachers by the end of the 1970s. Obviously, that wasn't a good forecast, and in fact, I've lived through about 9 hype cycles of AI since then. Each 5 years, enough progress is made that the optimists say that we have digital deities, and the pessimists say that the Terminator is coming. And they've been wrong the past 9 hype cycles, and they're wrong in this one as well. That said, this is a larger advance than has been true for some time. And so there is a lot to talk about in terms of what's going on. And I'll give you my perspective, which I think is both balanced in the sense that I'm not unduly optimistic or pessimistic, and also has a historic anchoring to it. So um, I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes and leave time for questions. And what I want to walk through pretty quickly is what is AI, just so that we're all using words in the same way. And then dive into literacy and AI literacy, particularly in the context of schooling. So AI is an umbrella term, but it's also constantly evolving because it's loosely defined as tasks that ordinarily would require human intelligence. And of course, over time, the tasks that human intelligence can accomplish get more and more sophisticated, in part because of the supports that that come from technology. But at the same time, AI gets more and more sophisticated. So it's sort of a race that AI can never win, at least not until we get artificial general intelligence. But it is something that if you look across time, you see that the bar keeps going up in terms of what constitutes true AI. AI also has a lot of different moving parts, and this diagram presents it as a nested set of capabilities in which generative AI, the newest edition, is sort of at the core, but it's surrounded by other kinds of AI that collectively enable it. And so there's a lot of different terms. Each of these is somewhat different, but because they're nested, each of these draws heavily on the others. And it is important for many people, particularly the general public, to realize that even before generative AI and large language models, AI was everywhere. That there's it's built into things that we use all the time, and tacitly um, we um, we use it, we need it, but it has been behind the curtain. And what generative AI does is it makes it much more apparent that you're dealing with AI, and it also is a breakthrough in terms of language. So, in part because it is interactive and agentive, it made people much more aware of how much AI there really is embedded in everything. And also, it's opening up new kinds of fluent interaction with machines and new types of ways of requesting machines to do things that are being expanded as the types of AI that are possible expand. So it may have begun with large language models, but it's now moving steadily into multimodal AI that I'll mention later as presenting some interesting types of opportunities. But it's important to realize that actually a lot of this sort of explosion of different capabilities is ultimately based on relatively few core foundation models. And so understanding the strengths and the limits of those foundation models is really, really important. At this point in the evolution of AI, they're the they're the core that undergirds everything. Now, as small language models develop, that may no longer be the case, but right now, that's where we stand. I want to highlight just how alien AI is. There's a lot of science fiction stories in which people encounter alien life, and it has bizarre ways of communicating. But I very much doubt anywhere in the universe where we encounter a biological form of alien life, it will think in the way that large language models and chatbots think. Because the fact of the matter is that um, generating a response one word at a time probabilistically uh, is not a natural way of thinking. Biological organisms will think in much bigger clumps, and some of the bizarre behavior of hallucinations and so on comes from this characteristic of chatbots. So the big breakthrough is that large language models solve something that people in AI have been trying to do for 3/4 of a century, which is to be able to talk to machines as if you were talking to another human being and have the machine respond appropriately. Now, I'm being very careful with my wording here because I'm not saying that the machine understands or comprehends, but I am saying that with training, the machine, without understanding or comprehending, can make an appropriate answer much of the time, not necessarily all of the time. And that does open up a whole core of things. But it also opens up an interesting characteristic of humans, which is called the ELIZA effect. Also, when I was a graduate student, Joseph Weizenbaum, a natural language expert and AI person at MIT, developed a little program he called ELIZA, after Eliza Doolittle in Pygmalion. And Eliza mimicked a Rogerian therapist. For those of you who go way back, Carl Rogers was a big therapist in the 60s. His therapy was based on reflecting back to the patient what they were saying. So when you talk to Eliza, you would say, Eliza, I had a rough day today. And Eliza would say, I hear your day was difficult. And you say, my boss is just terrible. And Eliza would say, I hear your boss is part of the problem. And every now and then, Eliza would say something like, how do you feel about your mother? So it would sound a little bit more like therapy. It was nothing but a bag of tricks. No sophistication of AI behind it. But Weizenbaum was horrified to find that many people would spend hours and hours talking to Eliza, telling it their innermost secrets, thinking that they were getting therapeutic advice, when it understood nothing at all of what was being said to it. And what that highlighted in terms of anthropomorphizing AI, thinking that it's like a human being, even though it's very different, is that our brains, our neural networks are wired for language. Perhaps the biggest learning that we do in our entire lives is as an infant when we hear a language and we're drawn to it because of how we're wired. And we begin not only to try to make sense of it, but to participate in it. So there's this innate belief that anything that generates language must be intelligent and have a human kind of intelligence. And that leads to a lot of problems when people try to work with AI. So that's just a quick review of things that many of you may well already be familiar with, but I just wanted to lay the groundwork in terms of putting my own stake in the ground about where we are with this. So what is literacy in AI? I feel as if there's now a literacy framework for almost every human being on the planet. People just keep endlessly generating literacy frameworks, which I don't think is productive at this point. But what would a good literacy framework look like? Well, Selber did a nice analysis of literacies in general, because we don't have to reinvent the concept of literacy just because AI comes along. We should use frameworks similar to past literacies. And that framework could have three levels: functional, which is being able to use AI tools and media; critical, which is deciding whether it's a good idea to use the functional capabilities that you have in a given situation; and rhetorical, which is if you decide it is a good idea, you can use the tools not just for the AI to accomplish things, but to empower yourself in order to accomplish things that would be impossible without AI and that would have great value in terms of the contribution that they make to other people. So let me play this out in terms of taking much earlier technology, the invention of reading and writing, essentially the development of text within a previously oral culture. And once text is developed, then textual literacy, the basic part of it, is learning to read and write. And that's still true today, that reading and writing is foundational for participating in modern civilization. But that isn't really where basic functional literacy stops, because understanding, once you have text, how you can augment the text to increase understanding involves looking at other kinds of representations that complement text that you can add. And it also involves understanding the concept of schooling, because schooling originally developed as a way of ensuring people had basic reading and writing. And then once you had schooling, you could think about numeracy and math and literacies in other fields. It involves the invention of the library, because libraries involve putting a bunch of texts that are different than one another under the same roof, which allows categorizing and cross-referencing. And now we see, very pervasive learning ecosystems, including things like social media that are multimodal, that are used to communicate with text as kind of a core capability inside of it. So functional literacy really includes its socio-technical counterparts that are invented to make that basic technical literacy of complete value. And an interesting question to ask then in considering AI literacy is, what are the socio-technical inventions that are going to enable us to take full advantage of generative AI and the other forms of AI that it's based on? Because what I see in all of these frameworks is like a literacy framework for text that stops with reading and writing. It says, that's it, you can read and write, you're literate. But true literacy, even at the functional level in AI, goes beyond prompt engineering and being fluent with AI apps to other kinds of inventions and possibilities. And I'll just sketch two of those. I don't think anyone knows what the full list is going to be, but I'll sketch two of them that I have been involved with in my work with this National AI Institute that I'm the director of research for. So one of the things that's been a goal in education for a long time is the idea of personalization. And I define personalization in a relatively strong way. That is, it's not just adaptation, where if you get an answer right, you get a harder problem. If you get an answer wrong, you get an easier problem. It involves voice and choice and rich personalization to people's cultures and contexts and desires and needs and so on. In the National Institute that I'm part of, we've been working for 4 years with one more year to go to develop AI-powered assistants for the teachers of adults and for adult learners. On the front end, the AI allows very rich evocative experiences, and on the back end, the AI involves very sophisticated learning analytics, including now natural language processing analytics that really allow a deeper understanding of what the person is about. And this enables powerful kinds of personalization. We're developing things, for example, that might surround professors, where, like me, where there's a content tutor for students who are falling behind, a question answering teaching assistant for all the students that don't read the directions, and so they bombard you with questions, laboratory assistants, library assistants, a social matching assistant for finding good learning partners in a large online class, and so on and so on. And I want you to imagine that in a university or even in a school, that every teacher might have a suite of assistants working with them, but then the assistants can talk to one another across teachers. So in the university, they might have a digital community of practice where they consider, Chris and his learning style and his learning needs and how he's doing in history and what that reveals about what he might need in mathematics and how those can be built upon to better provide examples for what he's learning in engineering and so on. That would be a socio-technical invention that we could have done with human teaching assistants, but nobody has that kind of time. But we can imagine doing that with AI-based teaching assistants. The other thing I want to just quickly highlight, because it's a whole nother talk to get into it, and on my website, I've got a variety of talks like that you're welcome to come and look at, talks and articles and blogs, is this idea of IA, intelligence augmentation, in which a human being and AI work together, and each does what they do well, and the combination of the two can accomplish things that neither can by themselves. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. And this can be parsed as reckoning versus judgment, where reckoning is calculative prediction. The cancer doctor has an assistant that can scan medical journals and patient records worldwide every morning and provide updates on the disease, the treatment, and so on. But you would never want the AI assistant working with the patient directly because it lacks judgment, practical wisdom, understanding quantity of life versus quality of life, pain, death, personal and cultural beliefs about death, family circumstances, and so on. All of this are beyond the capabilities of AI, at least at this point, and I think likely for the recent future. And so the partnership involves reckoning that helps the human being do judgment. But then in education, we don't want to be teaching a lot of reckoning because then we're preparing students to lose to AI, something that I'll be talking about more later. And so we need to privilege judgment, which again gets back into the socio-technical innovations. So what I'm saying here is essentially that we need to not only think about prompt engineering and fluencing with apps as basic technical literacy, we need to think about what is the equivalent of schooling, what is the equivalent of the library, what is the equivalent of advance in learning ecosystems that AI makes possible. So how might AI help students learn? It's something that's neglected in a lot of discussions that I hear about AI is the idea that learning is a journey, and that we ask students to produce an essay or a symphony or a marketing plan, and that's a proxy, but it's a proxy for actually having developed the skills to do it. And when we short circuit the journey by using an AI tool in a learning, then you don't develop the skills. I read things that people say, well, students don't need to learn how to write anymore because AI is going to do the writing. Well, learning to write is actually learning to take your own original ideas, organize them, express them in a way that's compelling and interesting for others, and making a contribution to knowledge. And if AI does the writing and you're just editing it, none of that happens. So whether it's an AI or whether it's another human being, when you're learning something, you don't want anything that's doing your thinking for you. And yet, again and again, I see this happening when people talk about how AI is going to help students in education. My colleague David Perkins has a definition of understanding that I find really useful, that people understand when they can think about what they know in new situations. So you can get a perfect score on the quiz at the end of a textbook chapter with the little toy problems that the textbook chapter presents that are customized to just focusing on application of some kind of a formula. But in the real world, you have to be able to move beyond that and to adapt using the formula or whatever else you're learning into a different situation, more complicated situation. And that kind of transfer has to be scaffolded. There's a lot of research in learning sciences that shows that for some people, transfer just happens, but for most people, you really have to work in order to develop that kind of adaptive expertise instead of the rote expertise of just applying the formula. And of course, our high stakes tests are all about just applying the formula. There are a whole series of little toy problems that you're faced with. No one in the real world is paid for doing well on psychometric tests. They're paid for adaptive expertise. And so part of the challenge that we face in education now is that you can be a student who perfectly understands everything that you're taught. But that's not good enough because we need you to be able to generate knowledge as well as simply regurgitate knowledge. And so asking how AI can help human creativity is a very important part of asking what contribution AI might make to education. Now, one of the tools that our institute has developed illustrates, I think, how some of this might be possible. Vera is a AI agent for enhancing learning from doing modeling. So if you're, say, an ecosystem scientist, one of your fundamental tools is simulations. And when you encounter a natural ecosystem that's displaying some kind of challenging phenomena, you pull out your models and you start trying to build a model that will do the same thing so that you can understand causally what's going on. Vera doesn't do the modeling, but it watches students doing the modeling, and then it provides advice on the sequence of models, the strategies that they're using in the sequence of models that they're building. So it's essentially advising them about inquiry. And it might say, well, you're generating a lot of models, but every time you're changing more than one variable. So you can't really determine causality because you're changing more than one thing. And that kind of a tool that looks at human creative work and doesn't attempt to replicate it, but does provide fundamental types of feedback on it is really important. What came to my mind when I started thinking about AI was a quote from Shakespeare. The moon is a thief. She steals her light from the sun. And of course, moonlight is not generated by the moon. Moonlight is reflected light from the sun. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, but it's not powerful. It's not powerful enough to drive the water cycle. It's not powerful enough to drive photosynthesis. And so we're in a lot of trouble if we rely very much on moonlight. Human knowledge production is sunlight. What these large language models are doing is absorbing a lot of sunlight and coming out with moonlight. And it takes a lot of sunlight to make a little moonlight, as we're finding. And then we're feeding the AI models back into the training set. So now we're training people on hybrids of AI knowledge, quote unquote, and human knowledge. So we're actually weakening our knowledge base by pumping all of this moonlight into it. Bad idea. So education has to sort of recenter on making every person that participates in it a contributor to knowledge rather than simply a reflector of knowledge. Now, people who are optimists in AI would say, well, but Chris, give us 5 years and $5 trillion and we'll have artificial general intelligence. And this is where we get from the functional literacies to the critical and rhetorical literacies, which I don't really have time to discuss in detail, but I think you can see how those might be expressed. But Gen AI has a lot of problems, and those problems undercut many of the recommendations for how that I read for how generative AI should be used in education. And the companies are really just lying, I guess, is the most polite way I can say about it. They're not just exaggerating. They're lying when they say that they're on the verge of artificial general intelligence. There is no path from Gen AI to AGI that anyone can show me. And because they don't yet have a business model, they need more and more and more investment to throw more and more and more data into the large language models, and in hopes that a miracle of some kind is going to happen. And no one can say with certainty that it won't happen, but I think it's very unlikely. So the critical and rhetorical literacies center on understanding what Gen AI can and cannot do, which again then becomes very important, that it's not just about what AI can do, it's about what AI can't do. So I'm always been much more interested in transformation than I am in just improving the industrial era model of schooling. And 95% of what I read about AI in education is about doing things better. Oh, look, AI can do your lesson plan. Wow, it can make PowerPoints. It can turn a PowerPoint into a podcast. It can do this, it can do that. And there's nothing wrong with doing things better. There's nothing wrong with doing things more efficiently. But there is something wrong with keeping an obsolete industrial era educational system going using AI as a kind of duct tape. And the fact that if I had a time machine and I brought somebody 2 centuries forward from the 18th century and showed them where we are in the 21st century, the only thing they'd recognize would be schools. So we really have to find a way to do better things. And I think the real frontier with literacy in AI is imagining what the better things are, the equivalent of the library, the equivalent of the digital learning system, the equivalent of what was a very useful invention of schooling at a different time in history. So what are the better things that we can think about doing? Well, again, I don't have time to discuss all the ideas I have about this, and many other people have many other ideas as well. But certainly the idea of participation is important. I wince when I see all the people that say, oh, now we can have individual human tutoring, which is the pinnacle of education. Well, first, only a narrow range of things can be taught by tutoring. And second, the isolation of individual human tutoring is not characteristic of what happens in modern life or the best way to do knowledge production. So, looking at ways of enhancing creativity as participation is really important. I um, I read about people who say, well, you should have a personal learning partner because if it's 1 in the morning and all your friends are asleep, what you going to do? Well, there's such a thing as time zones, and what we should be doing is organizing global level uh, access to learning companions that are human beings that can contribute a lot more, frankly, than an AI learning partner by itself. And that's not the direction that the industry is pushing us, but I think that is a fundamental part of literacy is understanding that people are more sophisticated. So I'll just talk about my own work as an example of what might be possible in terms of doing better things. And I'm talking about this not because I believe it's the best example, but because it's an example that I understand, because I was part of the team that produced this. So over a 10-year period, my colleagues and I at Harvard, from about 2009 to 2019, produced what we called the Eco Empire, which was four major curricula in ecosystem science. And the last of these curricula was called EcoMod and was for third graders. And we decided we really wanted to see how hard we could push third graders because I've long believed that we put a glass ceiling over kids, that third graders can do the work of late middle school if they're properly supported, and middle school students can do the work of late high school if they're properly supported, and so on. So we had a digital ecosystem similar to the three digital ecosystems we'd built before then, that is about changes over a 15-year period when first beavers move in and then later woodpeckers move in. But then we said we're also going to do computational modeling. So we created a computational modeling environment. So this is a model of an ecosystem. This is a model of an ecosystem, sort of nesting complexity and abstraction. And I've put into the slides, and the PowerPoint will be distributed to you, links to the website and links to a video that I just don't have time to show that gives a sense of what this looked like in a third grade classroom. But if you visit the website, you'll find that it was very, very successful. And the third graders ate it up and asked for more. So we didn't find what the ceiling was, but we certainly found that they could do very sophisticated work when given the opportunity. So now I'm finally getting to the point I wanted to make, which is, okay, how would this kind of doing better things in third grade or in middle school or in the university level with immersive authentic simulations, how might that be enhanced by Gen AI? Now, what I'm describing is not a proposed project. I'm moving towards retirement. The EcoMove team is disbanded. This is a aspirational vision. It's not a proposed project. Wandering around EcoMod, you encounter different kinds of agents in the world that you interact with, just as an ecosystem scientist would in the real world. And Gen AI could have made those conversations a lot richer. It could have provided a verbal interface for the programming, which the students would have found more natural than mouse and keyboard. At the back end, we could have used data streams in a much more sophisticated way, including conversation analysis to find patterns and to feed back into students and teachers ideas for getting better. And I even think, given that we now can verbally describe an image and AI produces something and then you refine it over time by changing the prompts, that we will be able to prompt worlds. We will be able to prompt building a virtual world, given a big digital library of contexts and artifacts, and that would really open up opportunities for personalization, because now you can take the student's context and the student's culture and build a world in which they see themselves rather than a one-size-fits-all world. So that's one kind of better thing. But then if you take it even further, I have a daughter who's graduated in mechanical engineering, and so I've sort of by osmosis learned a lot of mechanical engineering. And what I'd like to do, and again, this is an aspirational vision rather than a plan, is to break the fourth wall in this virtual world work and to give students a kit of artifacts, physical artifacts, and say, why don't you build something that will help the beaver with the dam building, or that will help the woodpecker with pecking holes in trees to find insects, and have them do mechanical engineering in the real world. And then when they built something, scan it and make a digital twin, bring it into the virtual world and show it actually being used by the beaver and the woodpecker. Or there's a wolf that eats beavers, and so you could design a wolf defense system. Now, this would clearly not be highly sophisticated at the third grade level, but it would infuse engineering in a genuine sense into these immersive authentic simulations. And I think that that would be really, really interesting to see what would happen with that. So what I'm trying to say here is that by using the technologies that we have now, including generative AI and advances in things like maker spaces and so on, we really finally are at a point where we can do very powerfully evocative education. One of my favorite books from the 70s was Gödel Escher Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid, basically about how a mathematician, an artist, and a composer were all saying the same thing, but in different representational language. The author carved the wooden artifacts at the center of the cover that displayed the three initials of the three persona in the book. And the idea is that the artifact is the synthesis of the three. And we can get past Skinnerian behaviorist psychology of curriculum finally by saying, look, don't teach simple things one at a time. Teach something complicated in which students learn the simple things as part of accomplishing it. It's far more motivational. It's more effective, in fact, when it's done well. And we've got all the tools that we need to accomplish this. We can also think about ways to help teachers. If you're doing project-based learning and you've got 10 groups in your classroom and you're standing in the middle trying to figure out which group you should be talking to next, that's hard. It's hard because each group is in a different place. But if you are have an AI partner that sits in each group and doesn't participate, it just listens, it doesn't act like an agent, then the teacher can have a dashboard on their mobile device, and maybe it starts flashing for group 3, and a little text appears that says, this group appears to be going in circles, or one person is doing all of the talking, or the group is off task. And then the teacher can go over, verify whether or not that's actually what's happening, and have greater confidence in running a project-based learning classroom. So there's just all kinds of better things that start to open up when you think about this. This is an optical illusion. You can see an older person, or you can see a younger person with her face turned away. And my point here is simply that we're looking at all of this Gen AI stuff and makerspaces and all the other advances that have happened in the last several decades. And we're just seeing the older person and how to make the older person better by using these. But with exactly the same things, what we should be seeing is the younger person. We don't know much about her. Her face is turned away. But that's the future. That's really where functional, critical, and rhetorical literacy should lead us. So I'm pretty much out of time, but I'll just, because I want to have questions, but I'll just say very quickly some things about misuses and dangers of AI. The fact that AI is trained on the World Wide Web is not a good thing, it's a bad thing. These training sets need to be curated, especially given that hallucinations are structurally part of how a large language model works. And so moving towards small language models is going to be a very productive step. Character AI and starting to have learning partners and other kinds of things in which AI is taught to behave like a human being is a really bad idea. It's not a very good simulation of a human being, but it can be a dangerous kind of simulation of a human being. People have a dark side. That's a fundamental message of life. And that dark side can be drawn out by a learning partner that shapes you and you shape it. And the idea of bot therapists as kind of the modern version of Eliza is rightly frightening quite a few people. So I'll just close with this image that the goddess of wisdom in Greek culture was Athena, the maiden goddess, and she's always portrayed with an owl on her shoulder. And when the Romans conquered the Greeks, Minerva became the name, but the owl and the maiden character of the goddess remained. So this idea that you need an animal sidekick to be wise is really a very old one. And I think now we have a kind of a digital owl. We don't sit on its shoulder. It should sit on our shoulder. But how we craft that digital owl to enable us to be wise is a really interesting question. So after only 53 years, I finally created a professional website, and I've used it as a repository to put a lot of stuff under one big tent. So keynotes, probably this talk when it's edited, blog posts, scholarly articles. There's just a whole mess of stuff, and I've tried to interconnect it in interesting ways. So given that I was just skimming the surface here, I hope that you'll take a look at it. Thanks very much for inviting me.